All right. Thanks, everybody. It's great to see so many of you again. I know a lot of you from all over the country, so it's fun to kind of reconnect in whatever format we can these days. So Kylie asked me to talk about getting started with approvals, and so I'm going to focus, since this is a D365 UG, on approvals within the context of Dynamics 365. You can use approvals as a Power Automate feature anywhere you want, and the principles we'll go through today apply universally. But since you're probably all Dynamics users or administrators to some extent, I thought that makes it more relevant, and that's kind of my background too. So it made it easier for me to focus on that. So that's what we're going to focus on. To get us started, the scenario we're going to work with is this. Just to kind of give us something, I like to try to build something that you might actually use or close to something you might actually use in production. So this is a customer care department, and they need approval prior to issuing certain kinds of refunds, returns, or credit. And so the general rules are an RMA, which is gosh, I'm forgetting the acronym, basically a return authorization, merchandise return authorization. For something under warranty, no approvals required. If they need an out of warranty return or a credit of 10 to 25%, the customer service manager is empowered to approve those. But if they need a credit of more than 25%, the chief customer officer has to approve those. And the general business case for doing this is, hey, we want to have faster service. We want an approval in place so that individuals have a certain amount of empowerment. You have another level of empowerment that's pretty rapid, and only in special circumstances do we go higher than that. But we want to create great customer experiences. We want to respond more quickly. We want to drive productivity, and also we want positive PR. And this actually comes out of something we've done for a client of ours. But it's something you see in the marketplace a lot too. When you have great experiences, I don't know if any of you have heard of, oh my gosh, it's the famous shoe company, and I'm forgetting what it is, but they have, I think Amazon now owns them actually.
Zappos.
Yes, thank you, Zappos, where they have these levels of empowerment, and they've done great things where literally an individual called in and an order for like 20 shoes or something at some point, and the rep pulled up their customer history online. This was during sort of a customer engagement tour. And the woman, the rep said, hey, I see you're a really loyal customer and you've ordered a lot of shoes from us, and thank you, but 20 at a time is a little unusual. Is there anything going on? The lady said, well, our house burnt down, and so I'm trying to recover as much as I can. Insurance isn't paying for that much. So we're just doing the best we can. So I can't replace all of them. I'm replacing what I can. And the rep was able to quickly escalate it and get back to the person. Sorry, I got something in my eye. And was able to say, look, we're going to cover 50% of the cost of your shoes for you today. You're a great customer. You've gone through a hard time. And so, just an amazing customer experience and doing the right thing too. So that's what they're looking for, creating that kind of experience, but without having to, without risking giving away the shop, but also without slowing things down and making this arduous bureaucratic process. So I want to stop here and just ask you guys, what kind of approvals do you guys have in your organization? How do you imagine using this? Or I'll bet some of you are already using it. What kind of approvals are you doing?
Everybody has approvals, right? That's part of the business process. We have approvals to approve sample order requests. You're prospecting a new customer, they want to see a sample, and the manager wants to make sure that the volume that you send is not entirely large, that you're not giving the truck away. Or for cases, cases go through an entire process to go to from the customer service rep to a coordinator to an investigator, maybe a legal representative to review. So the entire approval process.
Awesome. Thanks, Mark. Those are great examples. Any others?
Yeah, we had a few in the chat. Heidi's talking about a blog approval process, so it can be peer reviewed, and they're already using Power Automate for that, and it's awesome. Also, refund approval by a manager. Ruth was saying that. I think a big one too for us, or I think about, is like marketing communications. You want to make sure that those communications are reviewed. Jill is talking about approval process for requesting special pricing for an account. So all great examples.
Nice, very cool. Thanks, you guys. Yeah, absolutely. There's just tons and tons, unlimited examples of this, and it's great that you can kind of pull these together really quickly. Sounds like we've got a lot of people already using the features out there, which is really cool. I know one other one of our clients does is they decided they want to do commissions directly out of CRM opportunities. But of course, you've got to make sure, for many organizations, the opportunity is really not the final statement of what the revenue is with the client. So they actually have an approval process where the rep essentially closes the opportunity as one, but they kind of have a soft closing process for that. And then there's an approval where it goes through a separate team that then reviews the financials, puts the information into the accounting system through a combination, in their case, of some integration, a little bit of keying, and then verifies everything and approves that revenue amount back to the rep to make sure that they're staying true to that and that there's accountability and all of those things. So tons and tons of ways you can use approvals in today's world. So I know most of you already, if you've heard me speak, you're probably like, oh Lordy, here's a slide again. Just my quick introduction slide. My name is Jeff Abels. I've been running a Dynamics and Microsoft 365 business since about 2002. Written a couple of books. I love it. I kind of geek out on it. So I probably spend a little more time working than I should, but I find a lot of pleasure in what I work on. So it doesn't always feel like work. On the personal side, the reason I do all of this is for the people that you exist to serve. So there's my family. Our daughters are both grown and married now. Up until recently, I was saying this is recent, but now I think our youngest one just celebrated her 3rd anniversary. And we have a new grandbaby who was born right at the beginning of the whole COVID thing. In fact, the day after St. Patrick's Day. For those of you who know what I talk about with luck, you can see he's very fashionably dressed right now. And Birdie is our doggie. She joined us about 1.5 years ago to help fill some of the holes in our empty nest. And for those of you who rode along, my wife and I love riding a motorcycle together, or on long trips, I'll go solo and sometimes she'll fly. And that was actually on the Tail of the Dragon. So if any of you guys ride, you kind of know what that is, but it's a very twisty road in Western North Carolina that's fun to ride on. So a lot of cool things going on. For those of you who are early on in the kid stage, I can tell you that's an amazing, wonderful stage. For those of you who are about to be empty nesters, I can tell you that's an amazing, wonderful stage too. So we get to have a lot of fun together. Okay. So a little bit about Power Automate approvals. First of all, for those of you who don't know, for those of you who do, sorry, we'll start very basic. I'm more of the citizen developer type. And so I like to assume very little knowledge and kind of build from there. But approvals in Power Automate are really kind of, to me, they're almost the core Power Automate process. They're a very simple thing to set up. It's a great way to get started with Power Automate if you've never touched Power Automate before and you think, well, maybe I'd like to start learning it, but there's so much, where do I begin? Approvals are a great place to start with that. In my opinion, if you're using any of Microsoft's tools, anything in Teams or SharePoint or Dynamics, that's really where your approval should probably be happening. That's the best tool to use. It is simple. You can get very sophisticated. So I'm going to start simple. We're going to get a little bit more sophisticated. And you can embed them into much more complex flows. So the one I'm going to go through with you in a couple of minutes here, I'm going to go through it in about 20 minutes, but really it's about a 5-minute process. I'm just going to kind of go slow through it to explain exactly how to do it. So you have all the basics to get started, but once you're in a rhythm with it, you can crank out simple approvals very quickly. Sophisticated ones, going to take a little longer depending on how many people are involved. And I heard a little bumping on the mic. Is there any questions? Okay. All right, so this is actually a recording. For some reason, I have a psychological block to doing live stuff when I'm doing these things. So I've recorded it with audio. If you guys don't hear the audio once it starts playing, please let me know. But I will warn you, the audio is probably a little lighter than when you hear me speaking. So you might need to adjust your headphone volume or something like that to hear things well. I've tried to turn it up as much as I can. Okay, so let's get busy creating our first very simple but useful Dynamics 365 approval. You can see I've got several tabs open here. So if you're following along, go ahead and open those up. I have a tab in Dynamics 365. I'm looking at a case. That's the record we're going to build this off of. I have Outlook open. We'll see how these approvals come through in Outlook. And then I have Power Automate open as well. So navigate to all of those things, get those open, and now we're just going to go ahead and create our new flow. So in this case, I'm going to do new, and I'm going to do an instant from blank. This may not be the way you ultimately do it, but I want to start really simple to start with, and you might find this is all that you need in your environment. So do instant from blank. We're going to give this flow a name. So I'm going to call this basic D365 approval. And then I need to choose what triggers this. And I have triggers available based on this being an instant flow. So I want to say when a record is selected in the common data service. So what that means is a user can select a record and run the flow manually. If you ever work with old manual workflows, you'll kind of know what this looks like. So I'm going to click that. I'm going to say create. Okay. The next thing I get is a quick question on, well, what environment do I want to use? Now I logged into a certain environment, but I can actually change the environment here if I want to. So in this case, I'm just going to choose what it gives me, which is the default environment that it's made available to me. And then I'm going to choose an entity name that I want to run this on. And as you may guess, based on how we started this, you probably want to use the case entity to do this. So we'll scroll to find the case entity. Cases, there we go. And once I fill that in, it then says, okay, do you have any other inputs you want to get from the user? I think this is a really cool part of an instant workflow. So I can go, you know, as a matter of fact, I want the user to tell me what kind of approval this is. So I'm going to name this field approval type. And then over here, I'm going to say, let's make this a drop-down list. And let's put some options in here for a user. So it might be an out of warranty RMA. It might be a credit of more than 10%, or it might be a credit of more than 25%. Okay, so just like that, we've kind of decided, we've gotten some input from the user, and now we're going to move into taking that input to create the approval. So the next step that we have in this case is an approval. So to get the list shortened, I'll just start typing approval. And here's sort of the icon for approvals. If I click it, I'll see all the approval types available to me. So there's 3 types available. Today, we're mostly going to be working with the middle one, but just by way of quick description of each, this middle one we're doing start and wait for an approval means we will launch the approval process, and the Power Automate, the flow, will stop and wait until it is either accepted or rejected before it follows up with any other following steps. So it'll just sit there idly saying, wait, possibly forever, until the user who is notified to approve it actually submits the approval or rejection. The other 2 go together if you use them. So this first one is, I'm going to create an approval, but I'm going to move immediately from that approval into executing some follow-up steps. And later in the flow, I will wait for that approval to come in before I continue to do some things. So for simple flows, you're almost always going to use start and wait for an approval. One might use the others if you have parallel, if you have multiple people who must approve and you want them all to have access to approve something at the same time, you might use a create approval, wait for an approval. And there are some other circumstances under which you might use that as well. So let's go ahead and get started with this. So now we have the decision of what kind of approval do you want? So I'll pull this down. I have 4 to choose from. There's 2 kind of categories. The first one is approve or reject. The second is custom responses. So approve reject is just what you imagine it would be. The recipient of the approval has 2 options to choose from. They can approve this or they can reject it. And then the custom responses, you can actually create other responses in there. So it could be approved, but please modify, or reject. So maybe you have a massive proposal making its way through your organization and you don't want to reject it because of 2 words that need to be tweaked a little bit or something like that. You want that adjustment to be made, but it doesn't need to come back to you. One example of how you might use that. So we're going to use approve, reject. Now we're going to choose, should it be everyone must approve or the first to respond will approve? So what this means is I'm going to give it a list of addresses. Could be 1 address, could be as many email addresses as I want. And if I put a bunch in there, everyone must approve is just what you would imagine. If I put 3 in there, all 3 have to approve it before it actually goes back to the original person saying this is approved. First to respond means it'll go to as many people as you want, but as soon as one person responds, it's approved or rejected and it's all over. So for simplicity's sake, we're going to go with first to respond. Now that I've given it that, it's going to ask me for some more information. So let's give some specific detail in here so when the person gets it, they'll know what is this thing I'm approving without having to click around to get more information. So we're going to name this RMA or credit approval. I could put variables in the title if I want to, coming from this dynamic content. Who am I going to assign this to? So your CRM may autofill this like mine did. So I'm going to assign it to Allie Jameson. Now I'm logged in as Allie Jameson, so I'm submitting and approving. Not an ideal situation, but it helps give you a sample of what you're looking for. You can put other addresses in there if you want to. What are the details in here? And you can see it says markdown supported, see this address. What that means is using sort of a markdown syntax, I can actually format this nicely. You can go to that URL furnished in here if you want to see more on that. I don't really need to look at all that right now. All I want to do is provide a little more information about where did this come from? What type of approval is it that I'm actually going through? So one thing I want to do is I want to put the name of the person who submitted it in here. So here's the display name of the user who triggered the flow. Yep, I'm going to put that in there, and I'll say this person has submitted a request to approve a, and then I want to look at the approval type. Remember, that's that field that I gathered after I triggered this. There it is, approval type. Put that in there, and then I'll just say please accept or decline or reject. Okay, so some basic instructions in there. Now, what would also be really helpful is what if I want to look at that case in CRM to see more about it? Who is the customer? What's our history with them? How will we work with them? So this is where that copy paste that I talked about earlier is going to come in handy. Let's go back over here to the case. Let's grab everything up to and including ID equals. Let's copy that. Now let's go back into our flow. Let's paste it in here. Now what we have in here is a link to the item with everything except the unique ID of the item. We want to have that in here as well. So let's go over here and type case, and you can see here's the unique identifier of the case. Great, drop that in there for me as well. Now in the approval email, that person's going to have a link directly to the case. And to make this friendly, I'd like to have an item link description here as well. So let's go grab the case title. Great. Now when they approve it, they'll see the title of the case, and underneath that is the complex URL for it. Now I might also want to put in here, hey, who's the person who actually requested this? So I can go put that in here if I want to. I'm not going to worry about it in this case, just for the case of this example. But other things that are interesting are, do I want to enable notifications? Sure, I want people to know that this came in. If they're using their mobile app, I want them to get the push notification so they can approve it right on their mobile device. And I want to enable reassignment. So if Allie decides that she doesn't have time to approve it, Allie can choose someone else to go approve it for her. So cool, I'm all done with that step. One more step to go, not quite done yet, because although I've gathered the approval, I have not notified the user whether it's been approved or rejected. So let's add one more step to this to send that person an email with the response in it. So I'm going to use Outlook. There we go. And I'm going to find send email, send an email. And by the way, one side note, whenever you see V number after something, always choose the one with the highest number. If you see one without a number and one with a number, choose the one with a number. If you see multiple numbers, choose the one with the highest number. Because what that means is it's the latest version available from Microsoft. The old one might be there to support organizations who used it. They didn't want to just delete it, but you want to use the latest one that's available to you. Okay, so now who do I want to send this to? Well, I'm going to use dynamic content to fill that in. And what I want to do is I want to send this back to the person who requested this in the first place. So here's the email of the user who triggered the flow. That's who I'm going to put in there. So let's put that in there. And then let's put a subject in here, and let's make it really easy for the user to kind of see a quick update on what's going on. So coming from my approval step in here, I have an outcome. So that says accept or reject. So I'm going to say outcome, your request for, and then let's go get that case title. There it is. So now I can see accept or reject your request for this case. So right in the subject line, I can see exactly what's happened here. Now let's give them a little more information in here. And then I want to put approval type. Remember, this is what I requested at the beginning. This is the data I got at the beginning. There you go. Your approval type request has been, and then again, I want to say accepted or rejected, or accept or reject. In fact, let's say request status is, that makes more sense, accept or reject. And what we want to put in there is the outcome. Okay, and then a little more information. The following comments were made. I'm going to come back to that in just a second. We're going to insert one more thing down here first. And then also put the user-friendly link in here for this user, right? Hey, I want you to be able to go find that record easily if you want to. So let's say use the link below to navigate to the case and respond to the customer. Okay, now I'm going to insert something here as a shortcut. I'm going to put a link in here, and I'm just going to say link title, and down here I'm going to say link target, and add that to it. We're going to go back and fill that in a little bit later. So you can see that that's been inserted in there. It's got dummy data in it. We're going to come back and fill that in right now. So to fill this in easily, that little pop-up that I put link title and the link into, that won't let me use these dynamic fields. So I put that in here so it would kind of do the setup for me. Now I'm going to do the little bit scary, but the code view. Okay, so all I need to know is coming over here to link title, I want to replace that with the case title. So let's see if I can highlight that. Can't, but we'll still make it work. So now we're going to do case, there's case title. Put that right in there. Great. Let's delete link title now. And now between the quotes over here, this is where I need to put the actual link. Now remember, it doesn't have the link inside the data. It has the ID. So I need to come back here to case again, grab the same information, paste it in here in the quotes. Okay, now I don't have the final link. I have all but one thing, the unique ID. Put the unique ID in there too. Now I've built out a link for this. Okay, almost done. The last thing I need to do up here is, remember I said the following comments were made. Let's switch this off now so I can be in a nice formatting option. So I want to insert the comments that were made by the user who submitted the approval or rejection. So coming over here, I'm going to scroll down, and you can see there is a field down here saying responses, comments added by the approver. Cool, that's what I want in here. But watch closely what happens when I click it. So I click that to insert it, and all of a sudden something changed. Might not have been obvious if you weren't looking closely. The email that I was working on, it's still there. It just collapsed it. So everything I did there is still there, but it added this other wrapper to it called apply to each. And in it, it said, what's the output from previous steps I want to apply to each? Responses. Okay, so what does that mean? So first of all, notice when I expanded the email, it gave me this nice little message over here telling me what it means. In my words, what it means is this. If you remember back here on start and wait for an approval, I chose first to respond. And remember, all of my options had things in it that said, is it first to respond or all responses? And it allows me to put any number of people in here to assign it to. So Power Automate has to account for, I might have gotten 1 or 3 or 5 or 30 different approvals or declines based on how I put this together. So if I want to insert information from one of them in here, which I did, it says, I need to know which one you're talking about. So what I'm going to do for you is I'm going to put this wrapper in here that says, for each one of the responses I received, do this thing. Now, in the case of what we're doing right now, it's not critical because I only submitted this to one person to be approved. But if it went to 2 or 3 or 4 people, I need to decide how I want to handle each one of those. And remember also, because I'm doing this with each of the responses I receive, It might be a lot of email coming into the person who requested it. So just be aware. But in this case, it's one person that it's getting submitted to. Only one person can respond, so I'm only going to get one reply to it. You're done. That's it. You've built out your first approval. So take a look at it. Looks cool. I'm going to save it. Watch the little save icon up here. Takes a little while. Okay, and then I go back here just because I like to go back there after I've created one. So that's it. We've created it. Now let's go see it in action. So I'm going to go back to my case. I'm going to refresh my case just to bring in the latest Power Automate stuff. So I'm on my case now, and I want to submit it for an approval. So what do you think I do? So I'll look for the flow button. Right? I don't see it up here right now. So I'll come over here to the little drop-down ellipsis. I'll click the flows, and there's the flow that I just created. So I can run the flow from here. Now, the first time that I run this flow, it's going to sign me into everything. I'm not going to see this every time, just the first time. So it might be a little confusing for a user. Just get through it the first time and you'll be good. This is how it usually presents itself in subsequent runs. So here's the field, if you remember, that I created. What kind of approval do I want? I'm going to be doing a credit of more than 10%. Great. Let's run the flow. It's done. Just like that, it's done. The approval has now been submitted. So what does that look like? If we go over to Outlook and we wait for a moment, we will see that flow pop in. So it has submitted it to me for approval. Here's everything that I put into it. So let's approve this. I'm going to click down on approve, and it says, great, give me a reason. And we will say, good customer. Customer, great idea to go the extra mile. And I'll submit it. Okay, and in my email, by the way, once this is done, I'll actually have this record of what I did with it. So it builds this directly into email. So if on my mobile device or on my desktop, it's actually built right into there. I don't have to leave my email experience at all to get to it. Now, if I go back over here, I'm Allie, and I'm now receiving this particular notification. Hey, you've gotten approved. Here it is. For some reason, I butchered the link a little bit here, but that's something I can go back and fix later if I need to. That's it. You created your first functioning approval. Okay. Whoops. Sorry. Just restarted the recording for a second there. Okay, so hopefully that was helpful, particularly for those of you who might not have done an approval yet, and maybe those of you who did learned a thing or two. Now, I did it that way, particularly because I like to start with the simplest thing you can possibly do. So a number of you might have said, wow, that's not best practice. There's a lot of other things I would do with that. Absolutely. I agree with you. But I always like to give people something they can say, I can bite this off. I can go home and do this pretty easily without much more training. So let's dive a little deeper now and talk about what can we do to improve the approval. So let me ask you guys a question. How could you deliver a better experience triggering that flow? It sounds like some of you have done this before. So what are the ways can you imagine that's going to deliver a better user experience when you trigger the flow?
When the status reason changes.
Great. Just triggered automatic status reason changes. So you could have a status of submit for approval or something like that. And that will automatically start the flow. Good. I'll bet you've got some like that. Any others?
We don't have any answers in the chat yet.
Okay. Trying to wake everybody up. Keep this a little bit more than just Jeff being a talking head or square in today's world, I guess. Okay, so let's go in. Here's what I've set up for the next step. Not Mark had a different idea. Perfectly valid different idea. So you need to think about how your process flows and how approval fits into that process flow. In this case, I kind of said, okay, well, let's actually change the case data model to not require the drop down to say, okay, find flow and run the flow. I'm not a big fan of those either because over time you might have 30 things in there and you've got to wade through them to figure it out and all that stuff. Plus, it's more training. But maybe we do want some other information to be submitted at the time we submit it. So I took, you remember, I had that field that kind of pops up, which I do, by the way, think is very cool. In old workflows, when you did those on-demand workflows, you couldn't pop anything up asking for more data from the user. But in Power Automate, you can, and those things don't require changes to the data model. This requires a change to the actual data model. So on the case entity, I said, okay, let's take that field I popped up, and let's say I'm going to put an approval type field directly onto the case entity, and I'm going to have these different things in there. Now, you might have this be done differently. You might say something like, hey, it might just be a checkbox. It might not have to do with approval. It might just be a recommending this for the customer. However you want to work that. Two fields under that I also put in there is a approval and approval request comments field. So if I put something in there to make it easy for my manager or my manager's manager to understand what's going on, I might want to say something like, customer is requesting a very large order because of a natural disaster and has been a very loyal customer for a long time. So I think that this customer, merits getting this discount. Cool, that helps me as a leader a lot, not having to click it and open it and understand all that stuff inside of CRM to help make a better decision about it. So that can get submitted forward as well. And then I put a last field down there, submit for approval. So I'm not going to submit it just because the user enters an approval type and comments. The user then has to actually submit it. You don't necessarily have to do it that way. I like that because that allows me to kind of keep, if I've got autosave turned on and stuff like that, I'm not going to accidentally trigger it while I'm still trying to get all the information entered about it. So I'm going to be able to choose that field. And I can even potentially update that field. So if it gets declined, I can go change things around a little bit, resubmit it again just by ticking that field again, and it will resubmit it for me. So that's one potential approval. So let's talk about, if you remember my initial case that I did not fully address in the demo I just walked through, we want this to be multi-tier, right? So if it's less than 25%, tier 1, but if it's more than 25%, tier 2, go to the chief customer officer. I'd like a friendlier email, right? I mean, who the heck wants an email in their inbox that says reject is the first word in the subject line? So, can we use nicer language? Can we use something that's a little less abrasive to let people know, what's happened here, but in a way that feels helpful, right? That helps them understand, well, here's why and all those things. And I'd like to make it more portable. So one of the best practices I did not follow was I didn't use a solution when I did this. I just kind of went into Power Apps and developed it. I'd like to bundle it up so that I can do it in a test environment and it's all bundled up and ready to go, and I can deploy it into production when it's ready to go. So with that said, I'm going to focus here on just showing you more best practices. I'm not going to walk through the whole build process like I did last time because that would take a really long time. I'm going to open one up that's pre-built, and we're going to go through it much more quickly because you understand the basics now to say, how would I expand upon those basics? Again, I'm going to play this as a recording. Volume might drop a little bit. Now let's walk through a flow that meets those other requirements in more detail. So first of all, you might notice I'm in a different place. I'm inside of Power Apps. So we built this one as a solution in Power Apps. Why would we do that? Well, first of all, it is a best practice. Anything that's going to impact Dynamics 365 should really be encapsulated inside of a solution. It's easier to maintain, it's easier to find things, it's easier to understand what's going on in your environment. Also, very important is for portability. And I'm going to talk about that in just a second. But let's start by opening the solution. So here's our solution. I called it the case approval solution. I'm going to open it up. There's not a lot going on inside of this solution. It's really just the case entity. I created my custom fields we talked about a minute ago in there. And then there is my flow, which I just kept with the default name, but you could name this something different if you wanted to. So let's open up that Power App flow and take a look at it. And I'm going to go to Edit. So this looks deceptively simple. As we walk through it, it's probably going to start to feel uncomfortably complex if you've never done one of these before, But really at its root, it's a pretty simple process that we've just repeated a few times over. You'll see what I mean in a second. So let's go through this bit by bit here. First of all, remember last time we said we want to trigger this based on the user selecting a record. This time we've changed it to say when a record is updated, we're going to trigger the flow. So a few things to point out about this. When a record is updated, you probably know what that means. Anything changes on a specific record type, it's going to trigger this flow. Now, the first thing in here is an environment. You might see this looks a little different now. I could have selected one of the two actual environments, or I could have set this to current. Setting it to current means that whatever environment this is running in, whatever environment the solution has been installed on, that's the environment it's going to run in. If I chose one of those other environments, then it would still run in that old environment, even if you had moved the solution over. So if you have a development environment, for example, and you want to develop something like this in development, that's a best practice, you should do that. And then maybe move it to test it, another best practice. And finally move it into production when you're ready to put it into production, another best practice. It's going to save you a lot of time if you use that environment current as you go through that process. Now, if you do not put a flow into a solution, you do not have the option to select the current environment. So that portability is going to be lost. Can you still move it? Yeah, but you'll need to go and change this each time you move it if you're going to do that. So better practice, put it inside of a solution, then you can migrate the solution and it will automatically update to the current environment. Now, we want to use cases, so whenever a case is updated, that's when this is going to get triggered. This is the standard scope. If you've ever done workflows and dynamics, you know what that is. If you don't, not the subject of today's discussion, you can take a little more look into researching those. Now, one other thing under advanced items here, attribute filters item. What that means is this will only trigger if this specific attribute changes. So cases might be getting changed all the time, right? As you work through a case, you might constantly be adding notes to it, adding more details to it, attaching other things to it. And this flow would get triggered every time unless you did this. You select that particular field and say only that one. So submit for approval, remember, is a checkbox field I added to the form. So that kind of takes care of this is the situation in which this flow will actually be executed. Now, the first thing we do after that is we look at a condition. So this condition goes one more step to define when the flow runs, because the flow is triggered whenever that submit for approval field gets checked, but it also gets triggered when it gets unchecked. So whenever that field changes, it's going to trigger this. Well, I might want to, for instance, have this workflow when it's all done, automatically uncheck the field. What's that going to do? It's going to re-trigger the workflow. Well, I don't want it to go through the whole flow based on that getting unchecked. So this way I verify that that field is checked, is equal to yes. If that's true, it proceeds down the yes path here. But if it's not true, it proceeds down the no path. And under the no path, there's nothing to do. So the flow just terminates normally and says, I don't need to run right now. Now, on the yes path, the first thing we're going to do is going to look kind of familiar to you, right? We're going to say, oh, we have an approval here. This is an approval for the customer service manager. So not a lot of magic in here. You've already gone through this in the last little walkthrough we did. I'm pretty much doing exactly the same thing in here that I did before. In this case, I have a particular person's name. That's our customer service manager who has to approve that, and it goes through the process. Now, what's different in this case is I said, hey, I want to have a more personalized message to the user. So instead of just sending an email and saying, here's the outcome and pasting that as the field, I want to send one of two different emails. One is this got approved. The other is this was declined. And that way I can have cleaner language in the emails, a better user experience when I'm doing it. So I do the approval. After the approval, I have another condition. Is the outcome equal to approve? So this person has finished their approval. Now we have the result. If it's equal to approve, I'm going to go down the yes track. If it's equal to decline, or it's not equal to approve, I'm going to go down the no track. Let's look at the no track real quick. You remember how apply to each works. So for each response, and in this case, I only sent it to one person, so I should only have one response. It should only happen once. I'm going to send this email. And I didn't do a lot of work in formatting this email, but you can see this is my decline email. And I was nicer than just saying, here's the outcome, which is reject. It doesn't feel nice to get an email that says reject. So I could put specific language in here saying, hey, your request has been declined for this. Here's the reason it was declined. I could have said, here's who declined it, all of that in here if I wanted to. So now I've gone down the no path. But remember, my full business case is there might be circumstances where certain types of requests need to be escalated and get another layer of approval. So if I say, yes, my customer service manager approved it, and go down my yes path, I'm kind of repeating this process again. What I'm going to do is I'm going to essentially say, okay, let's look at this condition now and say, was this a request to approve something of 25% or more? So the user picked that from the drop-down list. If not, I'm going to go ahead and send the yes approved email. Now that might sound counterintuitive, but remember up here, the customer service manager approved it. And now we're saying, oh, and it's not something that the chief customer officer needs to approve. So I'm going to go ahead and send the approval email. So I got a yes to this and a no to this condition. So I go down this path. Over here, I got a yes to this condition. So I said, oh, it is something that now needs to be further escalated. The chief customer officer also has to approve it because it's a credit of more than 25%. Again, very little magic in here. You've done everything we've just talked about before. I've got a different person's name in here because this is my chief customer officer, and I might have done some other personalization inside the email. One small thing is the item link and the item link description. Remember, I had to kind of create that manually when I first created this. Well, it saved it up here, and I can reuse it without having to rebuild it here. So it saves me a couple of clicks. Again, not much magic there. Now I go down into condition 4. So based on, did the chief customer officer approve this, or did he or she not approve it? And again, I have something that looks very similar. An if yes condition, then I'm going to send the final response. This has been approved. If no condition, I'm going to send another final response. This is not approved. Okay, one little shortcut thing you can do here as you build all this out, because you start to see there's a lot of similar things here. There's a lot of this email that looks really similar from one to the other. I'm just changing maybe a couple of words of it. So one thing you can do that's kind of cool is you could come over here and you can say, copy this to the clipboard. And then if I were to come over here to add an action, like another email, I can just go to my clipboard and I can actually choose that thing I copied to the clipboard to paste it in here. So as you get into doing these redundant flows that have a lot of similar components to them, I can reuse the components using the clipboard piece if I want to. So that's it. This looks a little bit complex, but it's really just a simple approval, condition, approval, condition to go through this whole process and put all this together in something much more meaningful. And I could have done some stuff here at the end of it too. I mentioned earlier that maybe at the end of every single one of these, I want to have one more step that says, now go reset that checkbox to being unchecked again, because I want to give my user the ability to maybe submit an approval request for something a little less significant that might be more likely to go through. So I could add some of that logic to this as well. But that's it. You've now built a multifaceted approval with a very user-friendly experience without the user having to click around a lot and with nice messages going back via email to everybody. Okay, cool. So hopefully that was helpful. Let's now talk about how could we improve even on some of those improvements. So what if we want a record of that approval? Any thoughts on how, and by a record, I mean, let's say 2 months from now, we want to go back and say, was that approved or rejected? Who approved it or rejected it? When did they approve or reject it? Any thoughts on how you guys are doing that right now?
We currently have an entity to track that.
Yeah, great idea. I think that's how probably a lot of people are doing it, so that you can just go back and have a master approvals entity. No matter what you're approving in any entity in CRM, you can basically just populate that with a record. So you can say, here's the source record, here's the submitter, here's the approver, here's the date, here's any comments they made, and you're just adding records to that entity. Cool. Any other ideas?
I like Mark's idea.
Yep.
I mean, you could do it with fields as well on the entity itself, but I like the generic entity idea.
Yeah. Yeah, I like that too. The other thing you may want to think about, and I'll cover this at the end, is if you're going to use Power Automate as an enterprise approvals engine, and you might be approving things that aren't even in CRM, do you want an enterprise location for all the approvals? So you might create some other place, a SharePoint list or SQL database or whatever, for managing all of those. And by the way, behind the scenes, Power Automate, the first time you create an approval in Power Automate for an instance, for a common data model, common data service instance, the first time you do that, it actually extends the data model to handle some of that tracking for you. But if you go dig in a little bit, you'll see that even Microsoft kind of says, this is not a documented area. We don't recommend you mess with it. So yes, you can go look at that. There's even a tool within Power Automate to go look at that if you want to. But no, there's not a high level of confidence that that won't change radically or be different or something like that. So still a best practice, even if you see that you can go look at those historically, you don't know how that's being maintained. So consider creating your own location if it's going to be important to look back on that. What about this? What if one of those, we had a 2-tier, right? We have a customer service manager, we have a chief customer officer, and we put both of those as named people inside of this Power Automate flow. What if we want to build something around if a manager happens to leave, or if one of those people is unavailable, and we want enough flexibility that we don't have to go rewrite the flow in those cases or even update those items? Thoughts on how you would do that?
You could do a multiple approvers, right? And have an option for if any of those approvers approve, then the approval is approved.
That's a great idea. So just build it right in that, hey, we got 3 people. If one's gone for a while or one leaves, it's not going to, we still may want to update the flow eventually, but it's not going to break the process. Any other ideas?
We have the approver field on the entity. So the approver is selected first and then it's populated into the approval process.
That's a great idea. I wasn't even on my list. So yeah, you can just say, Mark is the approver of this. I know Mark is like right next door to me. He's here. He can approve this. So the user gets to choose the approver. You can also do things like well, actually, I'll do this as the next one. You could also use Teams. You could use a CRM team. You could use Microsoft Teams. You could use a distribution list. So you could do something like, say, here's a Microsoft team of sales approvers or something like that. You can assign it to that Microsoft team. And within that team, everyone can get alerted if you're setting it up correctly. Or you could even use a CRM team to do it. A little more work to do that. But you could basically use a channel or team email address to make that happen. So along those same lines, what if the approver depends on the submitter? So let's say you've got 3 customer service offices, and Mark's going to submit his, but it's going to go to his manager. Jeff's going to submit his. Different manager gets it. How would you handle that? Trying to keep everybody awake. Sorry, probably like, I just want to listen. I don't want to get involved.
You can use the Office. There's an Office connector for Exchange that'll tell you if you have it set up in Exchange who the manager is for a particular user in the system.
Perfect. Yeah, exactly. And in Power Apps, there's an action, which is an Office 365 action. And within that action, you can look at a manager, at a user, and you can get that user's manager. So that's one path. You could also, if you've got the manager set in CRM, you could potentially look at the CRM manager if that makes more sense. Ideally, you've got Active Directory and Exchange set up right to handle that. Okay. What if I want to prevent resubmitting? So I'll just talk about these last few, A, in the interest of time, and B, in the interest of letting you guys kind of just listen. So what if I want to prevent resubmitting, right? I submitted it, and then my manager said, nope, I'm not approving this, and I want it to stop there. So in Dynamics, you could use business rules for that to kind of say, hey, once that's checked as submit, set that field to read only. You might want another field if you do that to track the status. So if you make it invisible as soon as it's checked or something like that, it could actually cause an issue, right? I might want to go, oh, check to submit. Oh, shoot, I didn't want to submit it yet. well, now it's saved behind the scenes, or my business rule automatically set it as read only, and now I can't edit that, and I don't want to submit it when the record is saved. So you might want another field that actually tracks the status that sets that, or you could use JavaScript to wait until the record has been saved, and on load of the form, you could set that field to hide if you wanted to. And the last one is, what if I want to reset the submit checkbox? And I mentioned that in the video I went through. So if I said I want them to be able to resubmit, so at the very end of the flow, set that status to unchecked, set that field to unchecked now, so that the user can recheck the field if they want to resubmit it. Presumably the user makes some updates and says it's a lower amount or something like that, or a better explanation, whatever it is. Okay, and by the way, there's still a lot of other stuff you can do with approvals, but because you've got the whole power of Power Automate behind them, but ultimately it comes down to that one action, the approval action, and how you set it up within the larger framework of Power Automate to do it. If you're new to this, or maybe if you've even been at it for a while, a couple of levels of decisions to think about. First of all, this idea of enterprise decisions. So do you have an approval system of record? You've probably got a lot of different systems in your organization. I know some of you might even say, probably not Salesforce in your case, because this is a Dynamics user group. I presented this for the first time to a Power Platform user group, and some of them said, look, we've got Salesforce already in our organization. It's got its own approval engine. So which one do we use? It's a great question. Do you want to have an enterprise approval system? And in that case, set up the integration via Power Platform to be able to do approvals for Salesforce or whatever your other tool is, using Microsoft rather than using Salesforce. Only one approval system to understand, one master way to track all of these things. Makes life a lot easier in the long run, rather than every team doing approvals however they want to do it. You want to track those in a database. We talked about that a little bit. So you might say, absolutely, every single one we need to, because we want metrics and improvement around this too. How long did it take to get something approved? How many things are being rejected? You might want dashboards built around that. Or you might say, we're going to let users decide on a project by project basis. Some of these are very tactical. We just don't care. It's not worth the extra time. And then again, we have an approval tracking system of record, a database for all of that. And then on a project by project, approval by approval basis, you'll need to make these other decisions we talked about. What's going to trigger our approval? Is the user going to manually go select a flow? Is it just going to be a field change on a form? How are we going to integrate this with the user experience to make it a good, intuitive user experience? What types of approvals are we going to use? And you need to kind of decide this up front, because some of these might have very complex parallel wait conditions and stuff like that, depending on how sophisticated you're going to get with them. So with Power Automate, it's tempting to sit down and just start doing stuff with it. And sometimes when you're kind of sandboxing ideas, that's not entirely inappropriate. But ideally, just like anything else, design your solution, design your process before you start implementing it. Otherwise, you kind of find yourself having to throw away work you've done and start from scratch again, because it can be hard to just add things in the middle of what you've been doing. Identifying the approvers, how will we do that? Will the user tell us? Will they fill in a form? Will they fill in a field? Will I hardwire them into the application? Will I look at the manager field? There's a lot of different ways to do it. So think about that as you get into it. Again, making it fast and easy for both the submitter and approver. So a great experience for the submitter, also a great experience for the approver. And in general, especially the approver, right? Because they tend to be A, super busy, B, less technically savvy, C, sometimes not even users of Dynamics or whatever the system of record is. They're just kind of sitting above it a little bit, like, give me all the information I need to make a decision so I don't have to click a link into the system to do it. Save me time, save me training time. And then where will it be visible long-term, right? Where will we track these? So you might have already made an enterprise decision. Here's where all of our approvals are tracked. You might instead need to make this on a project by project basis. Couple of closing thoughts. Do remember to QA your approvals step by step. I went through it very quickly. If you've not done much with Power Automate, part of what you want to do is you want to come back after you've run it. You want to see, as you can see here, which steps has it run so far, which ones is it waiting on, has it experienced any errors, is all the data aligned correctly. You saw one little bug that unfortunately I didn't get to fix before I finished out the video, which was that link was not formed correctly. That's part of testing. Go look at all that and test it thoroughly so that by the time it gets to your users, or you're doing a demo video, you don't have those issues. Want to get really sophisticated? I mean, you can do all sorts of stuff with this, right? You can get into Azure Cognitive Services, and actually the same client that we did this for, one of the things that they want to do that we haven't gotten to yet is they have a merchandise return process, and what they require, they kind of sell bulky stuff that they really don't want them to return, because if it really needs replacing, it's just shipping an item that gets thrown out. It's useless after it's broken, basically. So they're like, all we want to do is get them to send us a picture of the item to see where the problem is, and a picture of the serial number on it so we know if it's covered under warranty. Completely manual process right now, right? The customer loves it. I don't have to pack this thing up and ship it, and you're going to honor my warranty. But what happens right now is it all comes in via email. They take a picture via their phone. They send it to whatever email address they told them to send it to. Now someone has to manually go look at that and say, is this the right serial number? Is this covered under warranty? Does this look like the kind of damage it's covered under warranty? Well, training cognitive services can take care of some or even all of that. In some cases, wouldn't be 100% perfect, may not be able to be completely automated, but even if it can only take care of 40% of them on an automated basis, it is a massive workload reduction for them. And it's a big improvement to customer service, where a customer doesn't say, it took a week after I submitted that before they finally got it in the queue to look at and tell me, yes, I'm going to send you a replacement. So some cool stuff you can do if you get really sophisticated with these things. I mentioned that approvals are stored in a place. And if you go look, when you first create an approval, a Power Automate with an approval in it for an instance, remember you've got multiple instances of the Dynamics, like the Common Data Service, it will actually add solutions to it. You can see those two solutions added right there that manage the approval process. So the entities and the data and all of that kind of stuff in there. And you can go and look at that and even see the entities and that kind of stuff. Now that link at the top of the slide, that tells you about how that's done and where that's stored. And it also tells you that, hey, this is mostly undocumented. But if you're curious and when you look at how that's done, you can go take a look at that stuff. And by the way, if any of you have project service automation or what's going to become project operations soon, in your Dynamics environment, it actually has some of its own approval entities associated with it that don't necessarily have anything to do with this. So be aware of that as you look at it and make sure you're looking at the right place to do what it is you're trying to do. Okay, wrap up stuff. And if there's any discussion points after this, I'd love to hear them. There's all my contact information. Connect with me on Twitter. My name is kind of uniquely spelled, so if you want to find me on LinkedIn, I'm very easy to find out there as well. I got a couple of ebooks. If you're interested in those ebooks, shoot me an email. Happy to get them to you. Couple of mentions here on other things that I don't want to go deep into, but this is what we do. If you're looking for assistance with anything with Dynamics or Microsoft 365, let me know. Glad to help you. And we're hiring. So I'm not sure if I'm supposed to mention that or I'm allowed to mention that or not. So that's all I'll say about it. If you're interested, I'd love to hear from you. Or if you know someone who's looking, I'd love to hear from you. Thanks, you guys. I'm going to stop sharing and you guys can kind of discuss, ask questions. I'd love to hear you guys sharing more of your own use cases. It's a little intimidating because I usually present this to people who are 80%. Power Automate is pretty new to me and approvals are very new to me. And I think I got the exact inverse here. We've got a lot of people on the phone who are like, I've been doing these approvals for a couple of years now. So I'd love to hear you guys weigh in on, hey, here's some other best practices that we're using to do these, or just questions you have or conversation points.